So good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining. First of all, I hope that you're all keeping yourself safe and you've got vaccinated, and hope all is well. Because that's the most important thing that I wanted to start off with. So today we'll talk about digital photography, and the assumption is that this is for complete beginners. That's what Ranjit also told me. So we're assuming that people watching this are beginners, and the agenda for today is like this. Let me put it on full screen.
Yeah.
So the agenda is we'll talk a little bit about photography, the history of photography, and after that we're going to focus on the digital SLR, as they call it, which is the camera used by people who are into photography. Although many people are using mobile phones these days, but there is a lot in SLRs that generally professional cameras, professional photographers use. So we'll talk about the SLR. And the most two important things that govern photography is the shutter speed and aperture. We'll discuss that with some examples. We'll talk a little about ISO. We'll talk about the importance of composition, because that's an important thing in photography. That's what makes a photography looks good. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the rules in photography. One is the rule of thirds, the foreground interest in landscape photography, and the different areas of photography, the different genre in photography, and what they are about. So let's get started. By the way, please feel free to stop me and ask me any questions if you want to. If not, you can ask me questions towards the end as well. I'm trying to record this, so hopefully I can send you the link and you can watch it anytime. So this session can be viewed by people who couldn't make it to the call, or even later on if you want to see it. It should be good. Right. So the world's first photography actually started in 1826. The first photograph was taken in 1826 by one Joseph in France. I think it's pronounced as Joseph Nicéphore, who lived in the Burgundy region of France. So apparently he took it from the first floor of his building where he was staying, using a very rudimentary technique, but he managed to capture the scenery. So that was the first photograph that's recorded in history. Several years later, but by 1889, George Eastman Company had developed what we then called the film, which was the celluloid coated photographic emulsion, which was then subsequently ruled photography for several years, and it was first used in the Kodak still camera. And there are photographers I know of who still use films purely for the passion it provides. These are senior photographers who used films quite a lot. They used to take photographs in film, take it to their little dark room, develop it, and take churn out excuse me, create photographs, and they still love to do that. And of course, the art and science of photography has evolved over the years, and today we have digital photography literally in the palm of our hands. So we have got very advanced mobiles that can take some really brilliant pictures. So that's where we are as far as the history of photography is concerned. And no discussion on photography No discussion on photography is ever complete without the mention of Ansel Adams, who was born in 1902 and passed away in 1984. He was a pioneer in photography. He used the old photography cameras, as you can see in this picture here, which had bellows, which had very little function, or far less advanced to what we have today. But he created some really wonderful landscapes using these. So he's still remembered today. He's considered something like the father of photography. And he had several quotes to his credit. The one that really impressed me was this one: "A true photograph need not be explained, nor can it be contained in words." So when you see the photographs that we will be looking at today, you will realize that it actually creates an emotion in you. It's like listening to a nice song. It's like listening to a very mesmerizing raga or a song, or looking at a nice painting. That it evokes a kind of emotion that you can't really explain. So photography has the same effect. But before we start, I don't want to go too much into the technical details, but this is how an SLR, a digital SLR, looks like, and this is what we normally use for taking. I'm sorry, I'm having a bad throat today. Yeah, so this is the camera we use for taking some really professional level pictures. It's used by professional photographers for some of the top magazines and so on. They all prefer to use a digital SLR. Let me see, I got a ping, so I think somebody's trying to join. Yeah. Yes. I think Shiva has just joined. That's right. Okay, so we'll continue. I hope my screen is visible again. So this is what it looks like when you take a cross section of an SLR from the top. So imagine you have placed an SLR over a table, and then you're looking at it from the top, and suppose we slice it through. What do you see here? You see this is the lens from where you're going to shoot. The shutter will be somewhere here. I mean the click will be somewhere here, and light travels through the lens here, through the lens aperture, and then it falls on a mirror here, and this mirror image from the mirror gets reflected, and this is the viewfinder. So when you look into this, you're actually seeing the image which gets reflected through. So it's real time. So you're looking at an image through the camera to see if it's properly framed, to see if the lighting is in place, and so on. And when you click it, what happens is this mirror closes, and the image is then captured on the sensor, which is over here. So I hope you can see my mouse. So this is where this is where the sensor is, and that's how the image is captured. So this basically is the way the SLR works. It's a very complex piece of equipment which has got several functions in it. It's also got an auto focus function, which is common in many cameras, but the DSLR contains a lot of electronic circuitry into it, which helps us to take some really stunning pictures. Okay, right. The other point I wanted to talk today is about two things. One is aperture and shutter speed. So shutter speed is one important thing that really governs the quality of the picture. So simply defined, it is the unit of time when a shutter remains open to expose the film or the sensor to the image and to the light. This is usually measured in seconds or fraction of a second. So if you want to capture something that's moving at top speed, you put it at a very high shutter speed, then you can actually freeze it. So if you're going to see car race or a motorbike race, just use very high shutter speeds, and then you can see the motorcycle or the car. You can capture it literally there. And similarly, if you use a slow shutter speed, you can take a very blurry effect of pictures. And shutter speed has a huge impact on the image. Since photography is all about light, obviously. This is an example of high shutter speed. So this was taken a few years back in Pulicat Lake when I had gone with a couple of friends for the purpose of taking some nice pictures. So we saw a group of herons there. So as our boat approached them, they took off. So I managed to take some pictures of the flying herons. So this photograph was taken somewhere around 1 by 1000 of a second. So this kind of an adjustment, you may not be able to do it on a mobile phone. So if you want to use a zoom lens, focus on a specific place, and if you want to adjust the shutter speed, then you do need something like an SLR to manage this. So this is a few years back, but this kind of shows an example of how high shutter speed can actually bring out some really stunning pictures. It captures the moment. You don't see that later on, but once you capture it, this is there forever for you to see. And contrast this with slow shutter speed. This was taken in a place called Watersmeet in Devon, southwest of England, and I noticed this place where there was a stream of water flowing through the rocks. So what I did was to position the camera using a tripod, and then a filter, a dark filter which actually filters light, and then I set the camera to about 10 seconds. So although it was mid-afternoon, it was exposed for 10 seconds, but it had the filter to actually cut off light. So there are several types of filters, in the neutral density filters and so many other types of filters, but I used the dark filter, which actually cuts light drastically. So it was almost completely dark inside the camera when you put that filter on. But since I kept the shutter open for about 10 seconds, you can see the flow of water. It creates a kind of a steamy, smoky effect on the water. Now, if you do this when there's no light at all, sometime maybe around any time after 7 o'clock in the night, for example, it could be pitch dark, and then you could expose it for longer and get even more wonderful effects of the flowing water. So here the situation is the rocks are immobile, stationary, but the water is flowing, and that's why you get this kind of an effect here. So that's the effect of slow shutter speed. So you have seen both now, what high shutter speed or a slow shutter speed can do. Now let's look at aperture. This is defined as an opening in the lens through which light passes onto the sensor. The size of this opening is referred to as aperture, and it has a huge impact on the image. So a combination of appropriate shutter speed and aperture size really controls the image. Now, a lot of people who are getting into photography, are serious about photography, they struggle to get their heads around aperture and how it affects a picture. Aperture is just an opening, but it has a tremendous effect on the photograph. So let's look at this a little more in detail. So what is aperture? So if you look through a lens which you normally attach to a DSLR, each lens has its aperture range. So the biggest you can make the aperture to is it's all measured in f-stop. This is what it's called. So it's f/1.4, which is actually the biggest aperture. And then you can progressively reduce the size of the aperture. And here this photograph shows you a range from 1.4 to f8.0. So you can reduce it even to 22. So f22 would be like almost like a pin-sized hole through which you take a picture. Now let's see what this aperture can do to our photographs and how it affects the photograph. Now I've made a kind of a diagrammatic explanation here to show you how aperture works. Now let's look at this first image here. This is the big aperture. So I've used the large aperture as an example. So this is the image that you're going to take photograph of. Now the image travels through this lens and through this large aperture, and then falls on the sensor. But because of the size of the aperture, the depth of field, as we call it, DOF, as I mentioned here, is called the depth of field, is very short. Meaning, if we focus on the tree with f1.4, then the tree will be in focus, but everything behind the tree will be out of focus, because of the fact that this big aperture has a short depth of field. Now contrast this with a small aperture. As you reduce the size of the aperture, the depth of field also increases. You can see that here. So the sensor can capture a lot more behind this tree than a large aperture. I hope this makes sense, but that's how it works. I will show you some examples to see how it really affects the photographs. If you have any questions about this, we can still
Yeah.
take it. Yeah.
One question, Sudhakar. Sorry, Shiva here.
Hi, Siva. Yes, please.
Yeah. So for the first one, right? So that's f1.4, is it? Or
No, no.
is it more?
This is. I've not given any f-stop value. I'm just. This is just a diagram to explain how a bigger and a smaller aperture works.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So generally, it could be higher, right? I mean, in the sense, from an illustration point of view, it could be probably f2 or 3 or something like that.
Anything,
Whereas,
yes.
as we reduce it, we can actually get a focus more.
Yes, correct. Yes.
Depth of focus will be more. Okay.
Yeah, depth of field as we call it.
Field. Okay.
Yeah, depth of
Thanks.
field will be more. Yeah, so I'll show you the examples of it. Then it will be very clear to understand. Now this, I took a picture of my wife in the woods near where I live in Bristol. It was a winter evening, so I've used f4 here in my shot. As you can see, her face is very clear. You can see literally the hair and her cap and everything, but behind everything is kind of blurry. This is good. This technique is good for taking portraits and certain other kind of pictures. For example, if I want to take somebody in a marriage function where people are having food, let's say somebody wants his picture to be taken, I can use a very large aperture like 1.8 or 2 or something like that. Focus on the picture and take, and everybody behind him will be blurry, but he will stand out. So this is a typical example of big aperture. So you can see this effect here. Now what you can do is, when you watch movies or other documentaries on YouTube or on TV, you can see that the camera, they alter between small aperture and big aperture. Many times when they show the key subjects speaking to each other, for example, you can see that the background is blurred and it focuses only on the main subjects. That's because they use a larger aperture to get this effect. Right. Now let's look at a small aperture. We've got f11 now. This was taken in a place called Viraggio in Italy, and you can see right down to the tip of this road, the end of this road. So almost everything, all the trees are visible right down, from the first tree, palm tree, right down. If you see, almost everything is visible. I deliberately took this shot using a wide angle lens with f11 to get that effect. Because if I'm taking this picture with f4, for example, it might not have the same effect. So for a picture like this, I need to take this shot with a small aperture to get the best effect. So that you can see the effect of aperture on photographs. Right. So let me stop there. Any other question on shutter speed or an aperture? No? Okay. Right. There's one other thing that I want to cover today, and it's called ISO. It stands for International Standards Organization, but in photography, ISO value determines the sensitivity of your sensor to light. Now, you saw the cross section of the digital SLR that I showed you initially. The sensor is the one that has replaced the film of the yesteryears. So you can actually adjust the sensitivity of the sensor to light by altering the ISO values. For example, if you are shooting in very low light or in the night, you may need to increase the ISO value in your DSLR to ensure that your photographs are not too dark. So if I want to walk around and take some pictures in the dark, in the night, for example, where the light is low, it's not possible to use a high shutter speed to reduce shake. So I might just increase the ISO, keep the shutter speed constant, and manage to take some good pictures. But there's a trade-off. High ISO values can compromise the clarity and sharpness of your image. Images tend to look progressively grainy as you increase the ISO values. And here's a range ISO 100 onwards, you can go up to ISO 6400, and some of the expensive cameras have even much higher ISO values. So this is just a small range that I've showed you. And these days cameras have even higher ISO values. You can go to a very decent level of ISO without actually having a grainy appearance on your photographs. That's how technology has advanced. But I personally prefer to use the low ISO as far as possible, unless I'm shooting in very low light, because the clarity and quality of images are much better when I use a low ISO. Right. Now we're moving on to composition. Many times people who are not photographers, let's admit many of us are not photographers. We go for a sightseeing or a picnic. We just take the camera and we look and we shoot. Sometimes it comes out well, sometimes it doesn't come out well. Now the experts have put together some rules to make your photographs look great, and these are the rules. We're going to start off with the rule of thirds. They will also look at leading lines. We also have to discuss about reducing the clutter in your photographs. Keep it simple and how beautiful that can look. Use contrasting colors rather than same shade of colors. We can also do creative framing wherever that's possible. And if you're taking landscapes, you must add some foreground interest to make that picture look good. And you can also add perspective. And when I show you an example, you'll understand the meaning of the word perspective as far as photography is concerned. It shows you the relative size of a building or a tree or anything by having a human stand next to it. So we'll look at that. So we're going to start with the rule of thirds. Now this picture I took in a place called Longleats, which is like a safari park, a quite famous place where animals are not caged, but you have to go in a car and then you have to look at animals, go through the area where the animals are living literally, and then you can take pictures. So this is one picture I have taken using a zoom lens. And now look at this. This is called rule of thirds, because if you take a picture and divide it into 6 equal portions, then the area, let me see if I can use a pointer here. Yeah. This is the areas where these lines cross. These are areas where your eyes tend to go. So if you want to make that picture look good, you have to focus the important aspects of your picture on these 4 areas, and your picture will look good. This is called the rule of thirds. Let me see if I can remove the arrow to show you the picture once again. Yes, I'm back here. Yeah, so this is how the picture is without the lines. What I've done here is to get the eye of this primate as the focus point here, because when you look at him, your eyes go straight and look at his eyes. So this for me was the focal point here. So that's why I have placed the picture in such a way that it falls on this key area here, which makes this photograph look good. Let me give you another example. This is a picture I took in landscape, so I thought let me show something that looks like a portrait and something that looks like a landscape. Now this is Santorini in Greece, where it was a beautiful evening where the sun was setting. The sunset in Santorini is such a famous thing that people literally wait to see it. So you can see people all over here as well sitting. So I was somewhere here and I took this picture. Now let's see how the rule of thirds applies to this. Have a look at this.
One second, Sudhakar. I think Ranjit want to join. Can you please admit him?
Let me have a look.
Yeah. Yes.
I think he should try again, because I should get the request. I can't see the request.
Probably. I think you continue that.
Is he trying again?
I think so. I told him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Normally, when somebody is trying to reach me, I'll get a alert, a pinging noise. So I didn't see that. Okay, we'll wait for him to come back. Yeah. So as I was saying, how does the rule of third apply for a landscape like this? So you can see here, the focal point for me was the sunset. So I tried to focus this, I tried to compose the picture in such a way that the sunset was in one of those points, one of these 4 points. So it was ideal in a place like this. So it looked good. So if you're taking a picture now in future, even if you're using your mobile phone, try to use some of these composing rules, and you'll see that your picture really stands out. It's not like one of the usual pictures. It will be a little different. Okay, right. Now, leading lines. So what's important here is leading line is something that your gaze travels along with. In this case, you can see this arrow here. Your gaze travels from the right to the left like this because of this bridge here. This is a place called Clevedon in Somerset in UK, and this is I think I've got a request. Let me just I think I've let Ranjit in. Right, so as I was saying, here's an example of leading lines as your gaze travels from this point onwards right up to the pier. So this is something you can use for some of your landscapes wherever there are structures like this, or trees also. So this is a man-made structure which is giving you leading lines. Now I'll go back to the old picture that I showed you of Viraggio in Italy. You have 4 leading lines here. You have the way the trees are lined up on 2 sides, and the way the lane is positioned here. So here you see the effect of leading lines. Leading lines can be, again, you have to use your imagination to use leading lines. You have to observe where there is a symmetry of buildings, trees, or anything to find out leading lines and to use them. Okay, right. How do you reduce clutter? This is an example of a photograph I took in a beach in Kerala. Actually, this was a very busy beach. I mean, there were a lot of people walking around. There were fishermen going around this place.
Can you hear me, Sudhakar?
Sorry, yes?
Sorry to interrupt. So, what is the significance of the leading light?
Yeah, I'll go back. Yeah, the significance of leading line is, your eyes has a tendency to follow a certain pattern. For example, if you look at this picture, let me see if I can. Your eyes tend to follow a certain pattern. So if you look at this picture, imagine this picture without the lines, you will tend to gaze in a particular way. That's how we as humans have a tendency to. You look at a certain pattern, your eyes travels through that pattern. Even in this picture, if you see, you may look at this, but this image right here, but you generally will look at the way this arches are designed right up to this point, which is why we feel that we should harness this tendency that we have to follow these lines. Your eyes will follow these lines. So if you take a picture which shows those lines, it kind of gives a good feeling to watch, which is why leading lines are quite interesting actually. That's based on your behavioral pattern, the way you look at something. Even the rule of thirds, which I talked about, is based on your behavioral pattern. Let's go back. That's how your eyes go into it. In a picture, your eyes will always get attracted to these 4 points here, which is why they say that the important subjects or the important portion of your subject should line up to these 4 points, which is why the photograph can catch your attention. It has this it has this property of catching your attention if it's placed in one of those 4 points. Yeah.
And can you mention the lenses what you used, like 18 mm or 35 mm, 50 mm, because it's a different pictures you are showing, right?
Yes, right. And in this one, I have used the 70-300
Okay.
Tamron lens, zoom lens. This
Okay.
one, yeah. This is the 10-22 Tamron wide-angle lens,
Okay.
and this is also the same wide-angle lens which I have used.
Okay.
Again, this is the same. All of these are wide-angle lenses. This is also the same wide-angle lens. Yeah. So as I was saying, this was a busy beach with lot of similar boats kept in all these places here. But what I did was I waited for a point when there was nobody walking around this place, and I decided to take this picture. So you can see how powerful an image can be when you reduce clutter. So with very less elements in the picture, it can have a stunning effect on the way it looks. So it can be really eye-catching. Imagine if there was a lot of other boats here, people standing here, the effect would be to that to some extent, but having this really cleaned up and looking empty except for this boat, it almost tells you a story. It looks very poetic and almost tells you a story. So think of taking pictures where there is less clutter. Using contrasting colors. For this one, I have used the Canon 100mm macro lens, which is used for macro photography. Macro is for photographing very small flowers and insects and so on. And I took this picture as an example of contrasting color, because you can see the color of the flower as against the background of green leaves, and see the effect it can create. This was also in Three Brooks Forest, where you saw the earlier picture of where I showed a picture of my wife. The same place where in summer we get some really beautiful flowers. So this was taken there. Right. Here's an example of creative framing. Creative framing is when you already have something that can frame your picture. In this place, this is Lucca in Italy, where there was already this arch. And I stood there and took this picture from here, and it's a creative way of taking some pictures where possible. So if you are in an old church or in a building which has a lot of arches, see if you can use those arches to take some nice images. That's one opportunity a photographer can use to get this kind of effect. This was the standard kit lens, at 18-22 lens, which we normally use along with the camera. Now, I talked about foreground interest, meaning you take a landscape, but if you can include something in the foreground, which is meaning very close to the camera, then the landscape has a different effect. It comes to life in a very different way. So in this picture, I thought I should just use this post here as a foreground object. But to my surprise, a seagull just came and perched himself right on the post. And I thought, great, that's the icing on the cherry, and I took this picture. So you can see what a big effect an interesting foreground item has and what it does to a landscape. I mean, you can use this landscape as an example of contrasting colors as well, because there's a splash of orange and yellow and everything. So that's an example of foreground. And I talked about perspective. Perspective is, now imagine this picture. This was taken in Glastonbury. This was using standard 1822 kit lens. And you can see the monument here. It's a very famous monument in Glastonbury. Imagine this monument without the human figures. You will not get the same effect of the size of the monument if you didn't have these human figures here. That's because your eyes have recorded the size of a human being. You know how tall a human being is, and that information is already registered in your brain. So when you see a human and you put him alongside another structure, then you can see how big that structure is, and it gives it an excellent effect. So next time you're photographing a big tree, for example, see if you can spot somebody standing near the tree, and it adds to the effect. So that's the example of perspective. Okay, now I wanted to touch upon the different areas of photography. I mean, if you are interested in photography, it's possible that you may go into one of these specialized areas. It could be landscape photography, or it could be wedding photography. What I have done is to add some examples of these photographs which I had taken. Again, this is a picture where again you can use the contrasting colors. It was a sunset. It is in a place called Stoke Park Estate in Bristol, not far from where I live. It's a hill actually, so I had to climb that hill here. You can see the walking path here. The sun, this is the west, and the sun was setting here, and there was this lady who also came for a walk with her little dog, and she's trying to photograph this tree. So I was standing here. I had my usual standard Canon 50mm lens, fixed focal length, and I used that lens to take this picture. I don't remember what f-stop I had used for this. It's probably a smaller aperture, that smallest that lens could offer, but I managed to capture this, and you can see the effect of the whole thing. So if you remember the rules and then you try to take a landscape photograph, then you can get the best possible effect. It's about being in the right place and having your presence of mind to quickly capture that image. This effect of the light, this effect of the sun, doesn't last for more than a few seconds, because the sun is setting, and as it sets, this effect of this light reflecting on the clouds rapidly changes. So you have to be alert to find out as this is changing. Just pick it up and be able to capture that moment. Now about wedding photography. This was my friend's wedding in a place called Hailing Island. They had requested me to take some pictures. The reason I took this as an example is, although we need to capture people and the standard images in wedding, we have to capture some nice moments and expressions as well. So here the couple were standing to receive everybody, and they were throwing petals on them, and you can see the expression on her face as the petal falls on her face. This is really an endearing moment in the wedding. So that again, it's an example of how much power photography has to capture these moments. This probably lasted for a second or 2 seconds, but taken at the right time, this picture years from now it gives you so much happiness when you see this picture. So that's how you have to do capture wedding photography. Look for those candid moments. Okay, now for bird and wildlife photography, you might have seen a lot of pictures taken about birds in various locations. This is one I wanted to share with you. This is in House Khas Lake in New Delhi. People who are familiar with Delhi will be knowing this place, I'm sure. We had gone there for a walk early in the morning, so we were there around 5:30, 6 kind of time, which we call in photography as the golden hour to take photographs, because the quality of light is best when the sun is rising or when the sun is setting. So we managed to enjoy the place, walk around, and I managed to get some good pictures here. This is also the standard kit lens. I didn't change the lens here. It's the same 1822 Canon. But the reason this picture looks good, looks the way it looks, is the way the camera is positioned. So that's an important thing as well. If you simply stand and take a picture, it won't look good. Here I had to kneel down and hold the camera to the level of my stomach actually, and then take this picture. So that's why it has a different effect. Here's an example of macro photography. I used the Canon 100mm macro lens for this. These macro lenses have a great magnification power, and you can see this beetle on a rose flower. You can actually see the pores on his armor. You can see the hair on his limbs, tentacles, whatever you want to call it. So the technique of taking macro photography is a bit specialized. You need a different kind of a flash. You need to adjust the camera differently. You need more light to take good macro photography, and apertures are usually very large in macro lens. So that's just an example of macro photography. Street photography is another beautiful area that I'm very fond of as well, although I haven't dabbled with this much. But street photography is also about capturing the moment. This is when I was in Prague for a vacation. So there was this person creating these huge bubbles, and this whole place was filled with bubbles. And my wife found it very amusing to stand between them and touch those bubbles, and you touch them, they burst, and she kind of enjoyed that. So you can see her face through the bubble here. She seems to be enjoying it. So you can take a lot of street photography. If all you need to do is take your camera as you walk around, you can still take some nice pictures. This was in Athens, in Greece, where there was this group of people where they were singing songs and beating drums. The reason I wanted to show this picture is what I did was to adjust the shutter speed so you can see their hands literally blurred because they were beating the drums. I wanted to capture that effect. So you can see this person here is beating the drums. This person here is also beating the drums, and you can see the shake on his hands. So I had to adjust and readjust the shutter speed until I got this effect. So the face is clear, but the hands are blurred. So that's what I wanted to capture here, and that's what I wanted to share with you all today. The other thing about street photography is you capture people's expressions when they least expect it to be captured. So you can see this person here, all the other people looking around. That's street photography. And portraits are another important area within photography, and we normally use the fixed focal Canon 50mm lens for this. So we can also use the macro fixed focus 100mm lens for this. This is an example where I took my friend's daughter with a window light. I mean, the room was a bit dark, but from the window we got some nice sunlight falling on her face. So I was taking pictures of the party because we had a few people at home, So I found this position very good, and I told her to hold it right there, and I took this picture. And it's one of my favorite portraits that I took. So you can see how sharply defined it can get when the light falls in the right intensity, in the right position. You can see its effect on portraits. This is another example of a nice portrait. Now, portraits can also have a story to them. This was when I went for a walk in Palakkad in Kerala, where I was introduced to this person in one of the temples. And his history is that he was beaten so badly by his own brothers on a property dispute. It left him badly injured, and he also apparently lost his mental stability. He was became insane actually. So he was nursed back to health somehow, and he found peace working in that temple. So they allowed him to stay there. They gave him food, and he used to clean the temple every day. So the story that some of these portraits can tell can be quite touching and intriguing. You can see the sorrow and the pain in his eyes, his disheveled looks. He's just managing to stay there and keeping himself alive, kind of situation. This is my wife's grandmother when she was celebrating her 100th birthday. So it was a very big occasion. It was covered by the press, and she is a person who has seen the world wars. She has raised 5 children through very difficult times. So what the story that this portrait tells is the lines of experience on her face, and how she's lived through life, through the ups and downs for a very long time. And this was the 100th birthday, which was a very joyous occasion for her children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Right. Now the other area of photography, it's a mix of portraits and everything else, is home and family. When we have our kids or grandkids or people around, when we want to take some nice pictures. This was in Southampton. This is my niece's daughter, and I was with them during the weekend, and I used my zoom lens. I was sitting a distance away, and she has this love for bubbles as well. So she was playing in the garden when her father was blowing these bubbles with a gun, and she was very joyfully trying to reach out for those bubbles. So I managed to capture one such moment here. So if you look back, you can see that the background is all blurred, and the focus actually was on the bubbles. The bubble is crystal clear. The subject itself is less clear, but the background is blurred. So this, if I remember right, was 5.6 or something like that, the aperture. But the key aspect here is capturing that moment. That's the important thing. Right, finally, I think this is my last slide. When you are into photography, just use your imagination and try to take some pictures. This was one where I asked my son to drop a cube of ice on a glass of water, and I took some continuous shots with my camera, and I managed to freeze this one. You might have seen this kind of pictures in some of the ads. So use your imagination, and you can take some nice pictures as and when you get the opportunity. I wanted to talk a little about 2 other things. One is post-processing. This is normally not mentioned at all occasions, but an integral part of digital photography is processing the raw file using an appropriate software. Now, SLRs allow you to shoot in different formats, so you can choose the format. You can use JPEG or RAW, etc. Normally, professionals like to shoot their pictures in RAW, which is .cr2 format. RAW files, as the name suggests, have minimum processing, so which means it allows you for maximum scope and liberty to enhance them digitally. So you can adjust the vibrance, the saturation, the exposure, the brilliance, and so on, so you can get the desired effect. So if you're serious about post-processing, then you need to choose a software from a wide range that's available in the market.
Okay. You want to take that question, Ratnakar?
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I was doing a Game of Thrones rerun, so I was in a burning mode basically.
Sure. Sorry, did I lose you there? What was the question? Sorry, I think we lost her.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, Sudhakar.
I thought somebody asked a question, so which is why I.
No,
Oh, maybe.
I think it's a mix from somewhere.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Right. Okay. Fine. Right. Okay. So choose a software from the wide range that's available in the market, and aim to shoot a photograph that requires minimum processing. Meaning, use your knowledge of shutter speed and aperture and everything, and try to shoot where everything is in place, and you need to do very little post processing. That would be ideal, actually. So the question here some of you might have in your mind is, yes, I'm interested in photography, so what next? What should I do now? If you're serious, get yourself an SLR. It's a mirrored or a mirrorless model. These days, the mirrorless model is also becoming very popular. SLR allows you to play around with shutter speed and aperture and all of that. So you can get yourself an SLR if you can. And don't use auto, because one of the adjustments in an SLR is auto, and most people, they just can't be bothered about going through all the settings, so they just put it on auto and take some pictures. Because if you put it on auto, then you don't tend to learn all the adjustments, and so you kind of put a stop to your creativity if you put auto. Switch to manual mode. There's something called M in Canon SLRs, and then control your photography by adjusting the shutter speed, aperture, ISO, and there are quite a few other functions available as well. Take time, be patient, learn those settings, and try different functions and different photographs. Choose an appropriate software for post-processing. I think there are some free versions available as well. Maybe you don't have to spend for expensive software. You can try using one of those free softwares to see how that works. Buy additional gear using a discretion. Let me also bring to your attention that the gear for photography, like tripods and so many other things that go with photography, can be quite expensive, particularly when you buy these well-known brands. So you may not need everything when you're just starting off. Use your discretion and buy stuff as you go along. Find your space. Maybe you're good at landscapes, maybe wedding is the thing for you, maybe fashion photography works for you. Just try the different areas. Maybe wildlife is something that you might be interested in. Find your space and then concentrate on that. And it's generally assumed by some experts that it takes about 10,000 serious shots to get the pro shot. Meaning, this is just a kind of a ballpark figure, but it just shows that people may not get the best shots immediately. You might have to work on it. Take as many pictures as you can, and sometimes I go on a trip. I take about a dozen, and I might just pick one. The rest will not be up to my expectations. So it just depends. Even if you continue with your mobile, there's still a lot you can do, because we talked about the rule of thirds, all the other functions, leading lines, and using framing, natural framing, and all of that. So you can still do a lot with your mobile phone, and see how you're getting on with the mobile phone. And if you still feel you want to take the next step, then you can invest in an SLR. Subscribe to digital photography magazines. I have benefited quite a lot from these magazines. I constantly try to get magazines. If I can, I get a hard copy of these magazines. If not, I get a digital copy and I continue to read through them. The more you read, the better, to keep in touch with the developments, also to see the work of others. Of course, collaborate with other photographers. You need to work alongside others. You can see the talent and imagination of the other photographers. You can learn from them. You can share knowledge. All of that works. And see if you can find a mentor. If there is a senior photographer somewhere in your group or through your friends, it's a good idea. I found one in Bristol. He is a very elderly gentleman who had taken about 750 weddings in his career. He was also the spokesperson for Nikon cameras. So he had a lifetime of experience. I used to go and meet him regularly, share some of my pictures and ask him for what looked good and what didn't look good and so on. So it's a good idea if you can find somebody of that stature to guide you. Continuously check out on online material. There's a lot of information on YouTube, on certain websites, photography websites, that talks a lot about photography. So you can check out these websites. There's a lot to learn.